John 1:1 doesn't say what you think it says. Hello, my name is Will. I run a channel called Wilwaukee where we talk about kind of biblical things. And today we're going to be looking into John chapter 1, verse 1. A lot of people have used this verse to basically misrepresent it and to use it with their agenda. So today we're going to break down John 1:1 and we're going to take a closer look at what is being actually said here in the Greek, in the Koine Greek to be specific. So John 1:1, I have it broken down into the three parts that is. So first we have John 1:1a. In the beginning was the Word. Okay. And the Word was with God. Notice the time. We are going to talk about that a little later in the video, how that is taken out. And here is the most important part. And God was the Word. So whenever we look at these translations, at the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and God was the Word. Or translations will read, and the Word was God. Both gods there are both capitalized G, lowercase o, lowercase d, gives the implication that it is the same God. Now, I just wanted to bring that up, so now we can break it down. It is important to know that many different translations of the Bible translate John 1:1c very differently. So first, I want to bring up the New English Bible 1997 translates it like this. What God was, the Word was, meaning the essence or the divine nature that God has is the same that the Word has. A new translation of the Bible of 1934 by James Moffat, I might be saying it wrong. The Logos was divine, which we will see is a proper translation. Even though Trinitarians will go shy away from this, scholars have said that this is a correct way to translate it. The Bible, an American translation in 1935 by J.M. Powys Smith and Edgar J. Godspeed, and the Authentic New Testament of 1958, Hugh J. Scornfield, both translate it as the Word was divine. So this is basically the same as the other one, but we have a logos there, and this one we have the Word. The emphatic diglot of 1864, as printed in 1942 by Benjamin Wilson, quotes it as a God was the Word. And then we have the New Testament in an improved version of 1808, published in London, translates it as the Word was a God. Okay, so as we can already see, a lot of different scholars are interpreting in the word was God in John 1:1c to mean different. So now we're going to get into it. So before we need to understand that there are four cases within the Greek language. There is the nominative, the genitive, the accusative, and the vocative. Okay, today though, referring to John 1:1, we're going to be looking at the nominative case and we're going to be looking at the accusative case. Okay, so first we're going to be looking at the nominative. The nominative is the subject of the sentence. So here we have the example in Greek. So Helen buys apples. What is the subject of that sentence? Helen, right? Buys is the verb, and then apples would be the direct object of the sentence. Or when we go to, or it can be the predicate. So Nikos is a good pupil. Describing who are we talking about? What is the subject? We're talking about Nikos. So is a good pupil. That is the subject of what's being talked about. The accusative is now the direct object of the sentence. So when we say Nikos knows Costa, Costa is the direct object. The subject is still about Nikos. So Nikos would be the nominative case. To know or to knowing is the verb, while Costa is the direct object or the accusative of that case. So here we have it broken down. So the part on the left over here, we have ton theon. So earlier I talked about how we will be addressing this part right here. So the ton right there represents the. So if we were to read this in the literal Koine Greek, it would be the God, ton theon. Now, under theon, we can go Tan first. So there is the ART, which is the article AMS, meaning the accusative masculine singular. That is what it's being talked about right there. However, when we go to God or theon, it is the NAMS, which stands for the noun accusative masculine singular. Okay. It is in the accusative position, meaning that Tan theon, or the God, is the direct object of what is being talked about in John 1:1. Okay. Now, when we go all the way over, we see theos. Theos is in John 1:1c. It is a NNMS, which means it is a noun nominative masculine singular. So now this is the nominative. Okay. This is not the accusative. So this theos here is the subject of John 1:1 when John brings up Tan theon in John 1:1b. That is the accusative, the direct object of the sentence. So when we look at it now, I brought up John 1:1 again. And this time I put parentheses with the original Greek with the case that it's being used. So in the beginning was the word, or logos, in the nominative, meaning it is the subject, right? So right now we are talking about the word. The word is the subject. The word, logos nominative, was with God, Tan theon, accusative. Also, the word with that is there can also be translated as toward, as we see in Westcott and Hort's interlinear version of the Bible, can also mean face to face. So we know that this word is face to face, in front of, next to, with Tan theon, or God, in the accusative. This God right here is in the accusative form, which again means it is the direct object. So now we have, in the beginning was the word, all right, the subject of the sentence. And the word, the subject of the sentence, was with God, the direct object, okay? Then it says in John 1:1c, and the word, logos nominative, was God, theos nominative. So here it is describing what nature the logos is. It's not literally calling it God, because God is clearly the direct object of the sentence because it is in the accusative position. So here we have two distinct beings per se that are being talked about within here. So again, this is important because when we read John 1:1 at face value from any Bible version, it just simply says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So we can read into that as it being literally the same God, but it's not. This is where the normal translation of John 1:1 is very poor, because it doesn't show you these distinctions. Next, we're going to hear a little piece from Daniel Wallace. So real quick, I'm going to bring this down real quick. Now, Daniel Wallace, if you've ever had an argument with a Christian or whatever, he is the author of Greek Grammar. This is Beyond the Basics. He has written other books talking about Greek, breaking it down, whatever have you. So he is going to be the main guy that Christians always go to for his writings. The only problem is, guys, is he is very biased on how he defines it. He is pro-Trinity, so you're not always going to get an honest answer from him because of his Trinitarian background. So a lot of times he is honest, and you can be able to catch him. So I'm going to bring this back up now. So Daniel Wallace was born on June 5th, 1952, as an American professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary. He is also the founder and executive director of the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, the purpose of which is digitizing all known Greek manuscripts into the New Testament via digital photographs. He earned his BA in 1975 from Biola University and his TMH in 1979 and his PhD in 1995 in New Testament studies from Dallas Theological Seminary. So Without further ado, I'm going to play an audio of him talking about John 1:1.
I do say that it is qualitative, and that means that it should be translated perhaps as divine. Now, frankly, if I say it's translated divine, that in no way is suggesting that Jesus is less than full deity. In fact, what it does is it says he's different from the Father. That's what that qualitative force means. The word order here in Greek is such that it affirms Trinitarian theology, that the Father and the Son have exactly the same essence, but they are not the same person. If the order had been the Word was the God, where you actually have the article the in front of God, that would be Sabellianism. That is, the Word is the same as the Father. Yep. But if you have, what you actually have in Greek is theos, God, ein, was, ho logos, the Word. But Greek grammar requires the article, the noun with the article to be the subject, so it should be translated, the Word was God. But God, the predicate nominative, is thrown forward in the sentence for emphasis. If it were to come after the verb, then that would be Arianism, as Luther says. If it came after the verb, it would mean the Word was a God. What John writes is against Arianism and against Sabellianism. And what I like to say is that what John wrote here in 4 words is the most concise way he could possibly have written that Jesus Christ is essentially the same as the Father in his being, but not identical in his person. It's a beautiful statement. And to say that he is any less than full deity is that's a rather improper and biased reading of what I've written.
Okay, so that was John 1:1 from the perspective of Daniel Wallace. So I did want to go back to the slide where we have the interlinear right here. So what he's basically saying is he admits, and I'm glad Daniel Wallace admits this because I have dealt with many Trinitarians who do argue this point, and it's a very bad point. They will argue that in theos, in John 1:1c, cannot be defined as divine. Now, how theos is right here, or just even the root word for theo, it can be translated as like the God, referring to the Almighty, the Father. It can be translated as God as a title to be given out, and it can also be translated as divine to give a quality. So here Daniel Wallace is actually honest and says that yes, it can be translated as divine, but he then goes on to say that he is not implying that Jesus is not at full deity, which I would argue, because Jesus here says that Father, give me the power, the glory that I once had, meaning that he does not have that same glory. So if we want to argue that it's the same glory as the Father, well, then if he gets this glory back from the Father, does that mean he is then greater? If he is equal with God, referring to that, if he gets back glory, then he would be greater. Or he's either less divine now, but then will receive more glory to then either be equal or still below the Father, depending on how we define that type of glory. Another problem that I have with Daniel Wallace's take on this is it literally reads like this. Let me go ahead, skip forward. So if we were to read it as he pertains it to be, it would be like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with person, or the person, and the Word was person, or a person, right? If it was read, if John 1:1 was written like this, Daniel Wallace would be 110% correct, because here we have it that the person in John 1:1b is in the accusative, while John 1:1c, that person, is in the nominative, showing that there are 2 different persons within this Trinity that's being preached. However, that's not what John says at all. He calls the second being that's being talked about in John 1:1b as the accusative, as the God, and the other one in John 1:1c as another person, but John calls this person theos. So how if you want to literally, from a non-biased standpoint, read John 1:1, we are talking about 2 different gods right here. We're talking about two different gods. Now, does that go against the Bible? We have to ultimately ask ourselves that, because we read how, and every church preaches this, that there's only one true God. And yes, we know that. But are there other gods? Well, this is what the Bible has to say on that issue. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 1, it says this: Then the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as, see how as there is italicized, so it's not there in the original Hebrew. So literally it says, see, I have made you God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. Here Moses is being called God. Next, let's go to Psalms 82. 82 says this: God takes his position in his assembly. He judges the mindset of the gods. The midst of the gods, excuse me. Here, God takes his position in his assembly. He judges in the midst of the gods. So if this is a divine council, let's just say they're angels, cherubim, seraphim, whatever type of angelic being or divine being is with heaven, with God, they also get the title of gods, of Elohim in the plural. Again, in Psalms 82:6, it says, I said you are gods, and all of you are the sons of the Most High. Now, this verse is argued among scholars where this is, again, talking about either the divine council, or this can be interpreted as the kings and rulers that are on earth right here. Still, whether they are humans or in other angelic beings, they are called gods. So we see a common trend right here within the Old Testament of other beings being called God. It is what it is. That's what the text says. So we need to put our dogma aside and read the text for verbatim for what it is. Even here in Acts 28:6, this is referring to Paul. Now, they were expecting that he was going to swell up and suddenly fall down dead, but after they had walked a long time and had seen nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and began to say that he was a god. So literally, in the original Greek, it just says that he was God, because nothing happened to here with Paul. Okay. Now, in Corinthians, it basically shows that there are many gods, but it only indicates to us that the Father is the one true God about all other gods. So it says this: for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is only one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and we exist for him, and we have one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. So Paul makes a very clear distinction between Jesus and the Father. He calls the Father the one true God, and Jesus is the one true Lord, right? We see many examples through the Old and the New Testament of God, Lord, and King. There's many kings. You can make the argument that David is the King of Kings. Then you can make the argument that Jesus is the Lord of Lords. However, the Father, God, is the God of gods. And next, we're going to look at this example in Deuteronomy 10:17. It says this: for the Lord, Lord's all capital letters, so it's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, Jehovah, however you want to define it as, for Yahweh, Jehovah, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who does not show partiality nor take a bribe. Psalms 136, verse 2. Give thanks to the God of gods, for his faithfulness is everlasting. Daniel 2:47. The king responded to Daniel and said, your God truly is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you have been able to reveal this secret. All throughout the Old Testament, the God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, Jehovah, he is referred to as the God of gods, meaning there are other gods out there, but he is the God over them, if that makes sense to you. Next, I want to look at Dan McClellan right here. Dan, I have a lot of respect for. He has received a master's degree from Brigham Young University in ancient Near Eastern Studies, majoring in Biblical Hebrew, and minoring in Classical Greek. He holds a master's degree in Jewish Studies at the University of Oxford and a master's degree in Biblical Studies from Trinity Western University. He holds a PhD in Religion and Religious Studies from the University of Exeter. So I do want to play two videos. They're a little longer, but I want to give you a honest perspective of Dan and how he defines.
And as proof, everybody, the data indicate that, and the Word was God, is a mistranslation of the final clause of John 1:1. And this is true even according to the consensus view among evangelical scholars regarding the grammar of the clause, ke theosino logos, because that clause is what's called a predication. It's a sentence that says X is Y, where the subject X is hologos, the word, and the predicate Y is this Greek word theos. And according to the consensus view among evangelical scholars, and this has been argued most authoritatively by Daniel Wallace in his book Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics, if that word theos were naming the God of Israel, it should have the definite article. Because in a predication, if the predicate is a definite noun and it is in the first position, in other words, it precedes the to be verb, if it is a well-known entity and or it has already been named in close context, both of which would be true of John 1:1, it would carry the definite article. It does not, though. It is anarthrous. It has no definite article. And so Wallace has argued, and most evangelical scholars agree, that it should be understood qualitatively. It is not naming the God of Israel. It is describing the qualities possessed by the subject, the word. And so the most straightforward and accurate translation would be, the word was deity. From there, Wallace and most evangelical scholars, however, will argue that, well, because the God of Israel exhausts the category of deity, in other words, because you cannot have deity apart from or in addition to the being and the substance of the God of Israel, ke theosino logos is still identifying the word as the God of Israel. Now, the problem with this is that it requires imposing this presupposition about God exhausting the category of deity. But that is a philosophical framework that was developed within the Trinitarian debates that took place between the 2nd and the 5th century CE. There are no data that indicate that philosophical framework was operative in the late 1st century CE when the Gospel of John was being composed and when it was initially in circulation. So that reading has no case to make that this is most likely what the author of the Gospel of John intended, or what most likely the audiences understood the text to mean. All it can say is, the text allows us to read it that way, and you can't stop us. And that's absolutely true. I can't say you're not allowed to read it that way. That's not how texts work. What I can point out, however, is that that reading requires retrojecting a philosophical framework that was developed in the later centuries, and that the data do not support the notion that that reading would have had any circulation in the 1st century CE. The data indicate that the text is best interpreted and best translated as, and the word was deity. Hey, everybody, the data indicate that, and the
John 1:1 does not say, and the word was God. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. And when we look at the Greek clause at the end of John 1:1, we see ke theosino logos, which sounds like it's just saying, and the word was God. But in ancient Greek, there are some problems with this interpretation. The noun theos there does not have the definite article, and it is occurring before the to be verb in a predicate nominative clause, an X is Y clause. And in the Greek of this time period, if a noun is referring to a specific agent that is either well known or has already been mentioned in close context, and both of these things would be true of the use of theos in reference to the God of Israel, then it should carry the definite article. And without it, it is most likely being used qualitatively. In other words, to refer to some quality of the subject of the clause. And so here, probably the best interpretation would be, and the word was deity. Now, a lot of these Greek grammarians who agree with this are then going to go on to say, this is obviously distinguishing the persons of the Trinity, the notion that there are three co-equal, co-eternal, consubstantial persons occupying the one being that is God. But that idea is a much later philosophical framework that did not exist anywhere near the time period of the composition of John 1. And so, in the absence of any data that support the notion John was conscious of any such philosophical framework, the most straightforward way to translate the end of John 1:1 would be, and the Word was deity.
All right, so that again was from Dan right there. So I kind of want to go over again John 1:1 real quick with you guys. So Daniel Wallace here even agrees that the word can be translated as divine. We see from another scholar, Dan, where he even says that it can be translated, he chooses the word deity, which also makes sense for either divine or deity. The only problem is, from Daniel Wallace's standpoint, he then associates that with the different persons that are associated with the Godhead. However, Daniel Wallace here is just inserting his own theological stance, where Dan does make a mention of this, where this whole version of the Trinity doesn't appear until way later. This is a way later development, starting at the Council of Nicaea, which was, I think, about 325, and then we see progressions of Constantinople in 381, even going into the 4th, 5th, and 6th century, of constantly redefining what the Trinity is and reinterpreting how we see John 1:1. But it's important to know that it literally just means in the beginning was the Word, the nominative. The Word was with Ton Theon, the God, in the accusative form, and Theos was the Word. Theos defining what the Word is, the type of quality that we see with Yeshua. Not literally being God, but the quality of his nature being divine. Absolutely. So I hope this video has helped you a lot, get a lot more sense out of John 1:1. I know it can be confusing. Please, if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and more videos will be coming talking about more Bible verses that are commonly misconstrued. And so with that, shalom.